Yeah, so let's take a look at the project we're going to tear down, and that is this Drobo Capacity Calculator. Now, this has actually been on their site for quite a few years. Usually you find something like a neat interaction, and you bookmark it, you save it, you get some screenshots of it. It doesn't stay up for long, right? Because sites are always updating their projects, they're always coming up with new versions of it, or they just, maybe they retire it. But I think this has been up for several years, 3, 4, 5 years maybe. The idea is that you can choose one of your models, and so you've got this little tabs interaction up top, which of course would make its own project, a good project teardown, because tabs interactions are obviously one of the most popular and useful interactions we have in e-learning. But the idea is you choose a model, and you've got this little graph off to the side, and you can drag each of these little hard drives here to the Drobo, and it will both calculate or indicate which drive volume capacity you dropped, as well as give you some visual feedback. So I can keep dragging and dropping some different size drives here. It's not uncommon, right? Maybe you first start with your older drives, and then you start to buy some new ones, and you have a few different drive sizes in there, and the chart's being automatically updated. So a couple things I really like here. If I drag a new drive over one of the already populated drives, it'll update that total, recalculates everything. So in my mind, I'm kind of watching this thinking, all right, so we're having to re-add the variables or the numbers each time a new drive is dropped on. And then also the drive is being reset. So the one thing I like about the drive being reset down here, from a Storyline developer perspective, is how many different drives would I need, right? So if I'm in a 4-bay example, do I need 4 versions of each of these drives to reuse them? So just something I'm thinking of is, how do I allow multiple unlimited drive options here, even when the drive is filled. Also, if I click any one of these bays, it's going to reset the drive to empty. Obviously, performs a new calculation, and I've got that option here. All right, so let's take a look at what I came up with in Storyline, and then we'll kind of break this down into a couple different areas. Partly just to how do we create the drag and drop and state changes? How can we add the different capacities? So we'll look at some variables, and then we'll look at how to set it up so that we have an unlimited number of drag objects without having to, clutter up our whole slide with, duplicate objects. So here's what we came up with, and I will preface this one more time by saying this isn't a more advanced project. So if you're just getting started in Storyline, this may seem like a lot, but that's one of the things Storyline can do, is it's really easy to get started with it, but then it's also scalable enough that you can build advanced interactions. And so if you're brand new to Storyline, you see all this, don't think this is what the typical project is like, because this is by far not a typical project, but it is a good introduction or good way to see at least what's possible if you wanted to create something similar. So if I preview what I set up here, so similar, I didn't obviously build all that out right there. We have the different drives. You can see the little hover state on the box as I move them over. I drop one. There's my reset for the object, and I also have a state change here. So we're adding some variables. These are my number variables, and we're working with some drag and drops and state changes here for each of these. Let's say I want to change one of those. What happens if I want to reset one? Everything gets reset, and the capacity is recalculating it. All right, so let's go ahead and start breaking this down. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I actually have a practice file here, just nothing really going on. So just a graphic here for the Drobo, and then I have 2 bitmap images here for each of the drives. So each of these drives is what we'll use for practicing. First thing we're going to do is just set up our graphics. Whenever I'm building something new like this, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to worry about how my file or my graphics are going to look. So I try to simplify as much as possible, especially when it's something you don't really know if it's going to work or how it's going to work. No use wasting a bunch of time building custom graphics or getting it to look right until you know it's going to work right. So I'm just kind of using solid shapes here. This will be the drive, the default drive for the Drobo, and then I'll add the little states here for each of them. So if I look at the example again, okay, then I see that the idea is that when each of these drives is dropped on, I'll have a different state or some way to show that there's going to be the label for the graphic, and then the little green light will come on. So here's my start position. I'm going to edit this state, and inside of it, let's just zoom in a little bit, I'll place the default shape for the indicator light, but it's not going to be on unless the drive is selected. Now, to get this rounded effect, you see that little yellow square graphic here? I can select that and then just bring it in and out. Whoops. And that lets me change the roundness of my shape. In this case, I want it to be a complete pill shape, so I can drag it all the way around. And that'll be good for my, wait, that's not inside of the shapes. So I wasn't actually editing inside, so I want to select the shape again, double click. Now I'm inside the shape, and I can paste that inside. So this is going to be part of the normal state, This is the initial object, and then we're just editing the states and then adding this graphic. So the first state I want is one for that first terabyte, that 1 terabyte drive, and I'll call this custom state 1 terabyte. So I'm adding my own state here inside of the shape so I can visually display this particular label when I want it to. So I click add, and at this point it just makes a duplicate of the shape. But because I do want to change the way this indicator light works, it's going to carry over if I wanted to keep it the same color. So even though I don't see it there, it's still going to show. But because I want this to be a different color, I should come back here to the normal state, select it, choose copy, and then paste that right in place. Because I want this to be green when the 1 terabyte graphic is showing. So I'm going to change the color, just to hard code it with the green. And I'll add a label here. Fastest way to lay down some text in Storyline is Control-T, 1 TB. And somewhere like that is fine. And I'll just make it white. And I'll bold it a little bit. So just giving a little bit of a label here. It doesn't really matter what I do with it. Again, certainly don't want to get caught worrying about aesthetics at this point. I'm going to go ahead and click close, or done editing actually. And again, you're not going to see it here until we tell it to show. And when we tell it to show is when that object of this first one is dropped on this target. So I don't think I've given it a name. Nope. So let's call this drop target 1. And the trigger I want to use, I'm not going to use the convert to freeform. I'm going to do all of this just manually with triggers. So the trigger I want to use is change the state of this to the custom state we just created when this object is dropped on this target. So here's what that looks like. Come over here to the triggers panel, create a new trigger. Action we want to take is change the state of, that's one of the most common triggers, which is why it's over here under common. And I want to change the drop target right there. You can see how it highlights to the custom state we created, 1 terabyte. Not when I click something, but when object is dropped on. So the object I want to drop on is this drive, and I want to drop it on the target. So when drive 1 is dropped on drop target 1, we're going to change the state of drop target 1 to that custom state. Click OK. That's about as far as I feel comfortable going. I want to verify everything's working before I proceed. So let's just preview the slide and see what happens. All right, so here's our file. Notice how this first object is already draggable. Of course, if I release it, it's going to snap back. Second object isn't. There's no trigger associated with it. So just the fact that I added that one trigger to this object that changes the state up here when it's dragged makes this a draggable object. So immediately I've got a drag and drop interaction. Come up here, let go. Hey, it works. There's my label. My object is snapping in place. We can deal with that. And I've got this little green indicator button. So it works. Hey, success. A couple things I want to do. I would like to recreate that hover effect. So if I come back over here, notice how when I move the drive over, I get that little bit of a, see how the drives kind of create that hover effect with it? I want to do that. So how do I do that? Well, I can add a drag hover state. That's an actual built-in state. So click Edit States. And what I'll do is I'll just select the normal state, new state, And I'm not going to create a custom state this time. I'm going to come down here and choose drag over. And basically, Storyline's going to listen for an object being dragged over, and it will change that state. So let's just make this a little bit lighter. Maybe that's too light. Let's preview it. So I can just preview from here. Grab my drive and come over. That's a little brighter than it probably wants to be, but you know, it works. Don't need to worry about changing the color now. So essentially that first part is working. I want to add a second drive and just get two different drive bays here and see how that drag and drop works. So Control C, Control V to make my second target. Not going to build out every target, but I'll just stick with 2, because 2 is kind of, in this case, it's good enough to let me know that it really is working beyond just one example. And I'll change this name real quick to drop target 2. And what I want to do is copy this target, copy this trigger, and then just change the target, right? So I have one trigger that I created, and it's referencing drop target 1. Well, let's just copy it and paste it. Wait a minute. Copy it, paste it. There we go. And I'm going to double click it, and I want to change it from drop target 1 to drop target 2 when object drive 1 is dropped on target 2 this time. So I'm just going to deselect the first option and select that second one. Let's try it one more time. Preview. All right, so come down and grab my drive. It shouldn't matter which one of these I drop it on first. There it goes. Come up here, and now I have my 2 targets. That part's working really well. The part I want to address next is how do I reset this slide while still maintaining these custom states? So a couple things I thought of, do I make multiple versions of this drag object? And maybe when I drop it on the target, in addition to changing the state of the drop target, I could hide this graphic, right? Just turn it to visibility to hide, and then turn visibility of a duplicate object to visible. That would totally work. The downside for me, or at least as a developer, is I'm going to have a lot of extra graphics on the side, right? I have to have a couple, hidden for each one, or maybe I just have them, staggered a little bit. But it's a lot of extra objects. Instead, we can play off of Storyline slide properties and numeric variables to have the best of both worlds. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to come over here to the project variables, and I want to create a new variable. So here comes my window, and I'm going to create a numeric variable for each of the 2 drop targets. And the reason I'm using a numeric variable is that I have more than one drive. So I want to be able to count, right, or know which variable, which capacity I'm dropping on. If I drop the 1 terabyte on this particular drive, I want to know that the value is 1 for 1 terabyte. If I drop 2, 3, or 4, I want to know what the value is. So numeric variable is going to let me count those just fine. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm just going to give it the name drop 01, make that a number variable. And the default value is 0. It's not worth anything yet because nothing's been dropped on it, so it has no drives in the actual bay. And I'll create one more. We'll call that drop 2. So 2 unused number variables for now, 1 and 2, and that's all I need. Now what I want to do is I want to know what value I'm working with. And the way you always know what value you're working with variables is with a variable reference. And the way the variable reference works is you need an active text box, right? Text box on the slide, come back up to insert, and then choose reference. And we want to insert drop 1. And since I already know that the next one is drop 2, I can just say Control C, Control V, and then just make that change right here, right? So I can just change that manually. So you have the percent sign, on either side of it. The variable name here is in the middle, and that's all we need here in Storyline. So I want to adjust this variable each time one of these objects is dropped on it. Now we're only working with this first one right now, but we will copy and paste all this for the second one. So here's how that works. I want to set a variable equal if this is dropped on this target, and then this will update us with that value. So, and for that, we just want another trigger, and what we'll say is adjust variable, right? We want to set the value of that variable, and we do that by adjusting the variable. So adjust variable. So down here, adjust that variable, and we're going to be asked to select which of the variables you want. I'll start with drop 1, and what I want to do is not add anything, because adding is going to keep incrementing. I want to set the assignment equals. So it equals a specific value, and that value is 1 for that first drive. Click OK. Sorry, too fast. Not when I click, but when I drop, right? So when the object is dropped on, and the object being here is that first drive, is dropped on drop target 1. So got a little ahead of myself, sorry about that. When the object is dropped on drive 1, go ahead and change that. And I could go ahead and test it first, but I'm going to just copy and then paste, and then I will try both. I think I need to change this real quick. When object variable 2 is my second one, when, not the text box, I'm not sure what happened with that copy and paste, but when object is dropped on 2. Sorry, object drive 1. I'm only working with drive 1 right now, but I am going to modify this second variable. So the two objects I'm working with, the two targets are the drop 1 and 2, but I'm only working with this first option, this first drive right here, so I click OK. So what I would expect to see is when I drop that first 1 terabyte drive on to each of the drive bays, I would expect to see each of these numbers show a value of 1. There's 1, 1. And the reason we use the equals is for this right here. I don't want to keep incrementing, increasing that value, right? Every time I move this around, I just want it to be a value of 1 because this is 1 terabyte. This is the only drive. Now, if I add another one, right, then it would just swap out that 1 terabyte. That's how that interaction works. So everything here is working great. I'm going to close out of it. And now I want to work with resetting this drive back to its initial spot, right? Because you saw as we previewed it, it just hangs out up on top of here. Whoops, that's it doesn't matter here for development, but it's easier to work with. When I drop one of these drives, this drive up here, it just sort of hangs out right there. That might be okay in some cases, but in this case, I want it to always come back down here to the bottom. So here's what we can do. We can add a trigger that when this object is dropped on the slide, Storyline is going to actually jump back to the same slide we're on, and then we're going to change the slide properties to reset everything to their initial state. So then we'll have to use something else. But so let me just do that first part, and then we can go through that. So let's say this object right here jumped to slide, right? Remember, triggers are going to fire in order. So it's going to go through all of this first, and if my jump to slide target down here is on the bottom, then all of this stuff will still happen. So we say jump to slide, the slide that we're on right now, which is untitled slide. So I want to jump to itself. When it's dropped on, so when this object, this drive is dropped on, drive 1 is dropped on, drop target 1, I want to reset. Okay? Now, the last thing I need to do is come down here and make sure that when revisiting properties for the slide are set to reset to initial state. Because this is an interaction, Storyline is going to think that I want to keep this in place. So if I let Storyline automatically decide, it's going to keep that drive on top of the drop target. So that's not what I want. I want to reset everything to its initial state. So let me come back here, preview the slide. So as soon as I drop this drive right here, I would expect Storyline to reset. I just happened. I think I did talking through that too fast. So let me try that one more time. I released it too fast. So it's 0, 0. Nothing's changed here on the states. I'm going to drag this, and when I drop it, everything's going to go back to 0 except for that first number. So that's 1. So a couple things here. The states all got reset to their initial position, which is good for this one, but not good for the drive bay. But the variable didn't reset. So we reset the slide, but we didn't reset the variable. And why is that? Well, that's because the variables are going to still be persistent beyond resetting of the elements on the slide. So that's really cool, because that tells me now I can evaluate if this variable is equal to 1. When the timeline starts, go ahead and still change this to 1. So here's what that looks like. New trigger. Change the state of to a drop target to 1 terabyte, which is a custom state, when the timeline starts, right? Timeline starts is happening the moment this button, this object, tells Storyline to jump back to itself. So when it jumps back to itself, the timeline's going to start all over again. Oh, cool. So change it to 1 when the timeline starts of this slide, Untitled, but we need a variable condition, right? We need to know what the value of it should be, because if we add 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, and all those different states, we don't always want it just showing up on the 1. So instead, we want to say only if, change it to this 1 terabyte, only if drop 1 is equal to a value of 1. So if we drop the 1 on this target, then the value is 1 of that variable, and will be persistent even if the slide reloads. Click OK. Click OK. Let's preview it now. All right, so here's my drive. I drop it, slide reloads, and my variable is persistent. Now, it won't happen here, right, because we haven't set that one up. But that's awesome. So I don't have to come in here now and create like 30 different drives so I can just keep showing infinite number of drives. I get that with a simple variable to detect if this has been used, and then the slide properties to reset everything back to the first state. So let's set it up right here for the second one. Here's the slide trigger I want. So I'm just going to copy that one and then paste it. I should have pasted it up top. So let me undo that. Control C, Control V. There it is. Okay. So I need to change the target here for the second one, right? So if I double click it, it's doing the same thing. I'm changing target 1, but this time I want to change target 2, also to the 1 terabyte. But this time I want to change it also here to know if that second variable drop 02 is equal to a value of 1. So click OK. Preview. All right, so it doesn't matter which one I drop first. I'm actually going to reset the slide. It's going to happen really fast. So we're not really going to see it. It didn't do it. Oh, because we're not jumping to the slide when I do it. So come down here. Remember when we said jump to the slide? I'm going to double click this. In this case, this is kind of cool too, right? I don't have to add a whole separate trigger to say jump to slide when this drive is dropped on drive 2. I can say jump to slide when the drive is dropped on any number of targets. So I can kind of condense or consolidate those triggers into a single trigger, because I'm able to evaluate multiple dropped objects, multiple dropped targets. So drop target 1 and 2. I'm not saying it has to be dropped on both. It's just saying when it's dropped on this one or this one, go ahead and jump to slide. So click OK, preview, and I come down and grab it. Slide resets. States are changed not because I dropped on it, but because the timeline started. Come in here, drop it, and I've got that just fine as well. That's awesome. That's working. I got my reset here for both of them. I can close out. Now, I want to add, because I've kind of got this first one working great. This first hard drive, everything's working here on both of these. I'm able to adjust the variable. I want to add it for the second one. Now, if I look over here in my triggers panel, I don't have a ton of triggers, right? I've got on the drive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, essentially of those. I could just copy and paste them over to the new drive, but because these drives also don't have any custom states, I'm not really doing anything inside of them, it probably is faster to just delete this second one and make a copy. So I can make a control and then click and drag. Make a copy of it. I'll name this one drive 2. And just swap out the graphic. So the benefit is I'm going to get all these triggers down here for it without having to copy and paste them. So I think this case it might be faster. So just going to right click this graphic and I'm going to swap it with the 2 terabyte version. So right click, choose change picture. And in my picture, I think I want the second one, hard drive 2. So select that. And there it is, updated here on the slide. Nothing else has changed here with the triggers, but I have that graphic here. So in this case, I think that kind of works. But I do need to make a change over here to my triggers, and that is the value isn't going to be 1 terabyte, right? I need to change it to 2 terabytes for the custom state. And then I also need to set the value equal to 2 rather than 1. But I haven't made that custom state yet for this. So if I come in here, you see I have my custom 1 terabyte. I'm gonna double click this. Quick way to edit the states, just double click it. Click the duplicate button, and I'll call this one 2 TB. And there it is right there. So all I have to do now is just make that change to the text. Click close, and I'll do the same change here. Or if I had a lot of drives, I could just come up here to the Home tab, grab the Format Painter, right? And I can apply that extra state. I can copy and paste that state to this other object. So I click it, and check that out. I now have that extra state down there and didn't have to do the editing of the states. Pretty cool. All right, so the other thing I need to do now, like I said, is just come in here and make those changes to the drive 2 triggers. So the first thing is to change this to 2 terabyte. And the second one changes to target also to 2 terabyte. And I will make this one 2 and change it down here to 2. All right, that part is there. And the last thing I would do is just copy and paste these two and change those so I can also change the custom trigger. So Control C, Control V. And here I will change this to the 2 terabyte, 2 terabyte, and then also to 2, right? So I'm just evaluating whether or not each of these variables is 1 value or 2 value. If it's 2, I'm going to change it to 2 terabyte. And if it's 1, I change it to 1. So preview. So grab this one, drop it on the first one. Drop the first one also on there, so it's 1 and 1, but I should see this now change. The other trigger is now here to 2 when I drop it on either one of those. All right, so essentially, this is the big first part of it right here. I've got these two working just great. The states change. The other thing I want to do real quick before I move on to the calculation of the variables is I want to reset this. What happens if I click it, right? I should be able to click one of these to change it and delete it, right? So you want to get something out of there, click it and delete it. So that's pretty easy to do. Come over here. And I want to select the first one, right? The first bay. Take 2 triggers right here. I'm going to adjust variable when I click it. And if I click the first one, I want to set drop 1 equal to equals 0. So if I click it, set it to 0, right? That's part of the resetting of it. And click OK. And let's do that one more time for this one. Adjust variable. And also this be drop 2 equals, not an add or anything, equals 0 when I click it. Now, I also need to jump to the slide for each of these as well, because that'll reevaluate what the current status is, and it won't change any status for anything else. So jump to slide, and it'll be the same slide, untitled when user clicks. Then I'll do the same thing down here, jump to slide when user clicks. All right, one more time, preview. So I drop 2 up here, 1 down there. If I click it, back to 0, back to 0. All right, so this is all working really well. I don't have to have a bunch of objects here for my drives, and I get the same persistent state change for each of those. Go ahead and close out. And the next thing we want to do is add the total for these 2 drives. I want to know what my capacity is, right? So the idea is I have a bunch of these on here. I want to know what my total is with drive 1 or bay 1 plus bay 2. And we do that by adding another number variable, and I'll call this one capacity. So a new variable, it's a number. Default value is 0, click OK, and I'll go down here. And I also want to add a bit of text here, so I'm just going to call this one capacity total. That's just my label, Control T, and then I'll say %, capacity, %. So if you know the variables you're working with, you can just type it out like that with the %, makes it a lot faster. Center those. So what I want to do is I want to add these two together. So we do that by coming up here, add a new variable, and I want to say adjust variable, and that's going to be capacity. I want to add, right, whatever value of drop 1 is. So instead of a value, I want to add a variable of drop 1. So drop 1 is going to be added to capacity when the timeline starts, timeline being of this. Click OK. And I'll do that one more time. You see it right down here. I'm going to add it one more time and say adjust variable of capacity, add the variable of drop 2. So for every drive we have, we want to add that value to the capacity and when the timeline starts. So I have these two. Something interesting is going to happen, but let's go to preview it and see what that is. Maybe you've already picked up on it. We'll see. All right, so it's 0, 0, and 0. And if I drop 1 up here, everything looks good. Come down here again, and it's starting to add more, right? So every time I do this, this number is still growing. Even though there's only, say, 1, it still continues to add everything that I drop. So this number is going to keep getting bigger. Well, clearly that's not 8 terabytes, right? That's 3. It should be 3. So I need to reset this. I need an extra variable that every time this timeline runs, let's first set capacity back to 0 and then let it do its addition. So we'll add a new trigger that says adjust variable capacity equals 0 when the timeline starts. So every time we drop something new on there, we're going to clear out the value and tell Storyline to re-add whatever these current values are. Timeline starts of the main slide. So click OK. Now, variable trigger order matters. Good example of where it matters. Come up here. I need to make it 0 first and then add each of those. So click preview again. And I come in here, I drop it once. Drop the 1, it should be 2. If I drop 2 on it, I should see 3. And now everything is working as it should. So we're clearing this variable, this value every time before we reload it. Because every time we drop something on here, the timeline loads. If I click it, timeline loads again, and that variable changes. So pretty cool approach to doing it. I will show you one thing that I was talking to one of our MVPs, Phil Mayer. And when he talks about things like this, it was funny because we were kind of working out some of the ideas on this. He would have, what he would have done is he says he takes these types of reset, these calculations, and actually moves them to a slide layer. So the idea, he says, is he wants to clear up as much from his main level as possible. So something like a function, something that's like an addition, let's get those off the main slide and then put them on their own layer. So here's what this would look like. We'll make a new layer. Let me just call this one home, just so it's not untitled. And I'll call this calculations. And so what he wants to do is run something like this rather than having these here on this main timeline. And they kind of do they're a little odd or a little different compared to the other triggers that we're mostly working with. Move all of those up to the calculations. So click copy, and I'll just paste. Back here. I guess it might be faster to copy them. So Control C. And I'll just grab them. Now I will need to delete them, obviously, because I don't want, it doesn't do me any good if I have them down here. And then hide the layer, right? Hide, show layer, hide layer, this layer, when timeline starts. So it's going to go through all of those really fast. Come back down here, and I don't need these anymore. So delete it. So now I'm not running any I'm not doing the calculations here, but instead we want to show that layer every time something changes. So what we would do is every time we'll listen for any time these things change to show the layer. So now we're going to say show layer, and the layer would be calculations when, when variable changes, and the variable here is drop 1. Whenever that changes, go ahead and show the layer, Control C to Control V, because I also want to do it when drop 2 changes. So let's see if that works the same. It should, hopefully. Drop this first one up here. It's showing the layer, and then hiding the layer real quick, drop it here. Looks like the calculations are still working correctly, and so on. So a couple ideas for how that could work. It's kind of your preference for it. There is some value for removing things like the calculations on a separate layer as just a way to kind of separate or organize what you do. Obviously, in a 15, 20 minutes, we added quite a few triggers here, but, if you've been watching since the beginning, you see it starts with 1, and then we make a change, and then sometimes those changes you're just duplicating and then making one, a value change, in this case between 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes, and so on. So essentially, if we were going to scale this, we would just duplicate this object, bring it over, make the changes over here to the triggers, add an extra variable for that drop, and essentially you have it. Now, one question that might be coming up, I don't know, I haven't looked at the chats yet, is, what am I going to do? I don't do this type of training. What is this going to do? How would something like this work for, something I'm already building in, more of a traditional course setting? And I would say this is a great example for folks who want to have custom drag and drops where the incorrect choices reset to the beginning while the correct choices remain correct and visible. So this is a huge question we get in the community. You want to drag and reset the incorrect choices. That's essentially what we're doing right here. Even if you're using the convert to freeform in Storyline, which is obviously built in, has a lot of built-in functionality, we're augmenting that built-in functionality with some variables to make sure that certain states, right, state changes are persistent or remain in place, whereas we want to also then reset these objects back to their start position. In this case, we would add something else, like if it's incorrect or not the right target, reset it back. But if it is target is correct, keep it visibly available. So in a nutshell, that's really it right here. Obviously, a lot more we could do with it. I didn't really build out all these additional tabs for this, but really like the way the interaction reset. I love the fact that I can use the slide properties in Storyline without having to create multiple objects, right, just to get that effect in there. And then I thought the idea from Phil was pretty clever with just dropping everything on a separate layer for calculations. Again, it works either way. It's really up to you in that sense, but sometimes just moving something separate like that is a little cleaner when you're working on more complex projects. Hopefully, everyone was able to follow along pretty well. I will make the source file available, so you all have this to dig in and explore. But if you have any questions, happy to help with that too.